Let's discuss lock cylinder replacement on a Volkswagen product. This is a late 90s Golf that we're working on here today, and very similar to a lot of these with a flat blade key, which is going to be inserted into the steering column. Well, first thing we need to do, safety first. Disconnect the battery because we're going to be removing the airbag and part of the steering column today, so it's very important that everything's powered down. So we've already gone ahead, removed a couple of the covers here. They're done. A couple screws, they're out of the way. Airbag had 2 bolts coming in from the side. Disconnect the electrical connector. We're going to move that out of the way safely. Make sure we don't get any static charge near it. Now, I've gone ahead and already removed the nut that holds the steering wheel in place. Disconnected the electrical connector for the horn contacts and for the airbag down below. Now, quite often with a lot of domestic products, when we remove the steering wheel, we have to have a special puller. Not quite the case with these Euro products. You can simply remove it by hand. So it's very important that you mark it here. I've used a flat blade screwdriver in order to scribe a little mark on here. So when I reassemble at the end of the project, we know how to line it up properly. It's that easy. Simply remove the steering wheel. We're going to set that out of the way. Now I've already gone ahead and done some of the hard work here as well. Remove a couple screws for the turn signal switch. Disconnect the electrical connectors over here on the side. And the same thing can be said for the wiper switch. Those same screws that hold the turn signal switch, hold this in place. Unplug the electrical connector. We've got it out of the way. Now's where some of the trick comes in. You can see our ignition lock cylinder is inside this big housing here, and it comes out through the bottom. Well, we're going to have to remove this whole ignition housing now to gain access. So I'm going to use a 2-jaw puller here. You can tell it's one of my favorite good old trusty tools, and we're going to clip that on here. There's a little lip right here which we're going to have to hold it onto. So once we get it in place, we're going to tighten down the hold down screws. Just to be safe, I always like to use an additional set of pliers or vice grips, something to hold these jaws in place. We don't want this thing to slip and come loose while we're using it. I grab the wrench, work the puller here. Once we've got it snugged up, we can continue tightening down on the puller. And what that's going to do is start to draw this collar up off the steering column. So we continue working this slowly, bit by bit. Make sure it's not slipping off, and we're working the collar up off the steering column. Once we get our collar loose, we're going to set that off to the side here for reassembly later. Now there's going to be a little bolt down here holding this housing in place. And when these things are torqued at the factory, the head snaps off. So they can be kind of difficult to get off. Sometimes you might have to use a vice grips to grab it. Other times a little chisel and tap it around with a hammer might be necessary as well to get this out. And so we're going to save this or hopefully use a new bolt for reassembly. Once that bolt is out, now our whole housing should be loose. We're going to remove the tension spring and gently work this housing up a little bit, and you can see it started to slide out. Now it gives me access to get to the rest of the electrical connectors for the ignition switch itself. Once those ignition switch connectors are disconnected, we'll be able to remove the complete assembly and begin replacing our lock cylinder. Now that we've got the housing removed from the vehicle, we have to access the backside here and remove this Phillips head screw. Once we get the screw out, look at how easy the ignition switch comes out. Literally falls right out of place. Now we can access the backside of the lock cylinder, and you can see we're going to have to do some work inside here in order to release it and get it out the front side. Well, now that we've got our ignition switch off, we've got our lock cylinder housing here in the vise, we have to do a little bit of drilling. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not a fan of drilling anything to remove it, but yes, it is a factory procedure. So what we have to do is access where this little release tab is on our old lock cylinder. You can see me pressing it here on the new one. That's what I need to get at on the old one. So if we hold it up here, we can figure out how far down we have to go. And by lining it up, we can see I'm going to be just a little bit off of center here. So we don't need a big hole. 1/8 inch drill bit is perfectly acceptable. And then we're going to go where we made our mark, and we're gently going to drill. We only want to just break the surface here. And the hole's only got to be about 1/8 of an inch deep. Get through this aluminum in order to get to that spring. All right, now that we're through, and look, and yep, I see that black metal piece, so we must have done something right. I'm going to use my straight pick here to press up against that spring. And now we can remove our old lock cylinder. All right, now that we've got our lock cylinder inserted into the housing, we've gone ahead and installed the ignition switch, tightened up that little Phillips head screw on the backside here, and this thing runs through the motions just perfectly. Nice, smooth. We can feel all the different positions here. It releases the way it should. We're good to go. Now we can install this back on, slide it back down on the collar, plug in our electrical connectors here, tighten up that bolt once we get it all the way down there. And then it's time to install our spring and that collar. We'd use a special puller to get off. Now don't hammer that collar on, simply press it down evenly, and then later on when we tighten down the steering wheel, that'll draw it the rest of the way in. But before we get to the steering wheel, don't forget your turn signal switch, your wiper switch. Those all slide in place. Put your screws back on. Draw the steering wheel on, nice and straight. Get a good even torque on it. Good to go there. Then we're going to install the airbag. Make your electrical connection. Draw it in with the 2 bolts from the back side. Install our trim covers here. Hook up the battery, and this car is good to go. We don't have to worry about anti-theft on this car. So there's nothing involved in the keys, no anti-theft module right here that's going to disable the car from starting. So we've gone through a little bit of pain here, had to do some drilling, use some special tools to get this housing off, but that's all behind us. The car is now ready to start and run.